right, it's an important week for President Trump. A showdown looms over his Supreme Court nominee, Neil Gorsuch. And Trump has important diplomacy to attend to, meeting with the leaders of Egypt, Jordan, and China, all separately this week, all as the cloud of Russia continues to hang over the White House. New revelations today that Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, failed to initially disclose thousands of dollars in Russian money, speaking fees that he received from Russia's state-funded television network, RT. This morning, President Trump insisted that it's all just a distraction, tweeting, "The real story turns out to be surveillance and leaking. Find the leakers," he says. The revelation about Flynn's finances coming just days after Flynn's bombshell request for immunity in exchange for his testimony about Russian meddling in the U.S. election. Here's what the ranking Democrat on the House Intel Committee says about the request.
Well, I think we start out with a very healthy skepticism. There's a lot we need to learn before entertaining anything like this. There's a lot we need to learn from other witnesses, but I start out, I think, with a very healthy skepticism.
All right, I want to bring in Michael Allen, former Majority Staff Director for the House Intel Committee, and Steve Hall, CNN national security analyst and retired chief of Russia operations for the CIA. Good to see both of you. Okay, so Michael, Flynn's attorney saying in a statement, General Flynn certainly has a story to tell, and he very much wants to tell it. What may be entailed in that story if already the House and Senate Intel committees are saying, not so fast, we're not ready to cut a deal?
Well, that was quite the dangle. I mean, that might be, I guess, his legal strategy to put out there that, hey, I have a lot to say, but what he really wants is FBI immunity, less than the congressional immunity, I think. He wants some safety from prosecution. And he's trying to make it clear that he's got information to give. But honestly, it felt a little strange. It felt out of left field. It felt like something the lawyers should be trying to negotiate in private rather than put out on the airwaves like they did.
So, Steve, is it your feeling that that was a move to try to influence, I guess, public opinion, or perhaps even apply pressure to House and Senate Intel members by doing that?
Well, Fred, it certainly could have been that. I find the immunity, the possibility of immunity that Flynn and his people were floating, it's fascinating because I think myself and a lot of other people have said, you know, there's a whole lot of smoke, but we don't know about the fire yet. And now we have Flynn essentially saying, well, you know, there's enough here, at least on my side, that I might need to discuss immunity, which leads me to believe there may be some fire there. The other question I've got is, you know, if Flynn does somehow get immunity, either congressional or DOJ, Department of Justice, or otherwise, will others like Paul Manafort and Stone and the rest of them start thinking, geez, I better start thinking about this too, so as not to be the last guy at the immunity trough?
And earlier we heard from Congressman Schiff saying, you know, Americans should be wary, particularly of President Donald Trump's words in his tweets and otherwise, when he uses the word fake. Here's what Schiff said.
It certainly is an attempt to distract and to hide the origin of the materials, to hide the White House hand. The question is, of course, why? And I think the answer to the question is this effort to point the Congress in other directions. Basically say, don't look at me, don't look at Russia, there's nothing to see here. You know, I would tell people whenever they see the president use the word fake, it ought to set off alarm bells. And I think that's really what's gone on here.
So, Michael, do you agree with the congressman? And does it appear that he and perhaps others are kind of onto the strategy of President Trump?
Well, let's take a step back here. I mean, I think what President Trump is trying to say when he sends tweets out that like this is that he feels like his legitimacy as president is under attack, that it's been under attack since the moment he was elected. It was a historic victory. It shocked the world. Not many people realized that he was going to be able to win. And so I think he's still adjusting to the fact that there is a lot of information out there in the intelligence community that we may have collected about foreigners speaking to or about Trump campaign operatives or transition members that's now captured somewhere. And so I think he feels like he's in the middle of a hostile takeover of the U.S. government. This information keeps leaking out all over the place, and he feels like it questions his legitimacy. So I think that's why you see some of these shots on Twitter that he's sending.
Okay. Well, let me play what Republican Senator John McCain had to say about this investigation and Trump's role in all of this.
I think the national security team that the president has assembled is outstanding, and I hope that he listens to them, because they don't have any illusions about Vladimir Putin and Russian behavior. But this is why we need a select committee, Martha. Every time we turn around, another shoe drops from this centipede. And we need to examine all of the aspects of it, President Trump's priorities and the other priorities that many of us believe exist.
All right, so Steve, well, while McCain is praising, his national security team, he's also casting doubt on the real efficacy of House and Senate, investigations, and questions whether it can be a credible investigation.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent concern. I would agree with that. Look, let's just imagine for a second, and I don't believe this to be true, but let's imagine that there is something behind these White House claims of wiretapping or some sort of surveillance. I think it's a lot of chaff, but just for a second, let's posit that it might be true. Well, which is more important? Trying to find out whether somebody was masked or unmasked, or there was some strange thing that happened with surveillance, or is it more important to get to the bottom how Russia managed to try to influence the outcome of these elections? And that's a really much more important question. And furthermore, there's got to be an independent way to try to get at that is depoliticized as possible in this highly partisan situation that we find ourselves in. So I would agree with McCain. There's got to be a way, hopefully a bipartisan way, to get to the bottom of this critical question, much more critical than whether or not there was any wiretapping.
So, Michael, do you see it in the form of a select committee or independent prosecutor or all of the above?
Well, it could certainly get to that. I mean, I think we ought to give the Senate Intelligence Committee a chance. They put their best feet forward this week. They basically said, hey, listen, we've got the track record, we've got the experience, and we've got the bipartisanship to take on a very serious issue on behalf of the country. And so I'm not sure we're quite to the point of needing a special committee or prosecutor yet, but obviously there's more to come, because every time we all look down at our phones, there's a shocking new article, and so we'll just have to see how this develops in the coming weeks.
Steve, do you see it that the time is now, or do you believe that something else has to happen before an independent prosecutor or select committee is involved? All right, welcome back. President Trump and China's President Xi Jinping are set to meet at Mar-a-Lago later on this week for their first face-to-face meeting. And you might recall President Trump had some pretty tough talk for China during the campaign.
I'm going to instruct my Treasury Secretary to label China a currency manipulator, which should have been done years ago.
Trump also promised to fix the trade imbalance with China by renegotiating trade deals. I want to bring in David Rhodes, CNN Global Affairs analyst and National Security Investigations editor for Reuters. Good to see you, David. So how could Trump's tone impact this week's scheduled meeting?
Well, it'll be, it's a big meeting for both leaders. Trump specifically during the campaign said he was going to impose a 45% tariff on all Chinese goods imported into the United States if China didn't continue what Trump said was, manipulating its currency. Democrats argued that the manipulation of the currency sort of stopped several years ago, and that Trump was sort of exaggerating the problem. But this is a key issue. This is American jobs. He said over and over again, China is sort of not being fair to the U.S., that we're losing jobs because of this currency manipulation. So for his base, President Trump needs to, I think, raise these trade issues.
And one of the big issues between the two, China and the U.S., it's been North Korea. And this morning, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said China must cooperate when it comes to North Korea. Listen.
Oh, no. China has to cooperate. This is now down to, do we want to continue to see these ballistic missile attacks from North Korea, or does China want to do something about it? And this is all about the fact that they need to have action. And we're going to continue to put pressure on China to have action. That will be shown in multiple ways. But what we are going to do is say, China, you know that you're the only one that's doing this. We appreciate that you stopped coal going into North Korea, but we know it's going in other ways. At some point, we need to see definitive actions by China condemning North Korea and not just calling them out for it.
And that's in contrast to what President Trump told the Financial Times, saying, quote, well, if China is not going to solve North Korea, we will. That is all I am telling you. What does he mean?
Well, it's the threat of unilateral military action. Secretary of State Tillerson, said that decades of American policy towards North Korea had failed. And to be fair to Tillerson, that's true. I mean, China has a ballistic missile that can reach the United States. It's not very accurate, and the fear is that they would be able to put a nuclear warhead on that missile possibly within 4 years. That was also in the Financial Times interview. So, something is needed here. It's just what will be different. I mean, is Trump willing to actually use unilateral American military force against North Korea? He's going to maybe threaten that in private, but would he actually do it? And you don't want to make empty threats with China.
And what would be the possible repercussions if indeed the U.S. were to go it alone with North Korea?
Well, there's a variety of things to do, but if it were a military strike, the U.S. could set back the North Korean nuclear program. The danger is that North Korea has a large number of artillery and rockets within range of Seoul, the very large city that's South Korea's capital. Thousands of civilians could die in an retaliatory artillery attack by North Korea. And more simply, North Korea could...
His decision.
Tweets and statements and blame don't change facts, and the facts remain the same. When you look at the document, you look at the legislation, it doesn't repeal Obamacare. Even people who support it have called it Obamacare light. Doesn't bring down premiums. Even the CBO said premiums are going to rise for the next 3.5 years. And certainly it doesn't unite Republicans, as evidenced by the fact you got conservatives and moderates who are opposed to the legislation. And it doesn't unite the country. When have you seen a bill come forward where only 17% of the country supports it? So let's do better than that. Let's start over. Let's get this thing done right. And let's keep our promises with the American people.
All right, so where does the fight go from here? I'm joined now by CNN political commentator Ben Ferguson and political analyst Ellis Hennigan. Good to see you both. All right, so Ben, you first. The president said, that he would move on to tax reform. This was just an hour after the bill was pulled from vote. And then he tweets this morning. Does this mean that he's shifting, back to the focus of repealing health care?
I think you're going to see him focus on multiple things at the same time, but the reality is the political pressure is there from the American people to do something with Obamacare. Even Democrats will admit that there are problems with Obamacare and there are changes that need to come with it. The question is, how are you going to do this? And I would caution the Freedom Caucus, and I would also caution the White House at this point. Everybody needs to tone down a little bit and realize they went too fast the first time. 17 days was too quick. They put an arbitrary deadline on this. Obviously, they did not have the votes there. So pull back a little bit, start all over, try to become friends on this issue instead of it being a war of Twitter.
And so do you think that's possible? Anyway. Trying to become friends of Freedom Caucus and the president after the dialogue that has transpired. You think it can happen?
Sure. Yeah, I do, because I think that, look, in politics you fight hard. That's part of what you do, whether it be in a primary or a general election and moving forward, and you fight for what you believe in. You listen to what the congressman just said there. Only 17% of Americans were in favor of this bill that they were pushing. There were a lot of Republicans that said it was not conservative enough for them. And this whole idea that he's going to work with Democrats, name one Democrat on Capitol Hill right now that actually wants to help the president overhaul Obamacare. I don't think you can find one, so it's going to be with the Freedom Caucus.
Ellis?
No, it depends what you mean by overhaul. If you mean take it outside and shoot it, no, there are not going to be too many Republicans, Ben, who are going to join that particular party. Listen, guys, there has never been a lack of will by Republicans to kill Obamacare. They just couldn't come up with a way, right? And the plan they came up with, the greatest minds in the Republican Party have produced this thing, and everybody hated it. And so I don't see any indication that that's about to change. As soon as Republicans are willing to say, hey, we want to provide health care, we want to make this better, we want to improve the problems on the margins, Dems will be lining up to join that.
Okay, well, it seems like Trump is, intimating it's full steam ahead. He also tweeted, anybody, especially fake news media, who thinks that repeal and replace of Obamacare is dead does not know the love and strength in Republican Party. And then this was the vice president yesterday.
The President and I have faith. We have faith that Congress is going to step up and do the right thing. When Congress finally decides to repeal and replace Obamacare, President Trump and I will be ready to work with them hand in glove. You can take it to the bank.
So, Ben, no real timeline we're hearing, from either the vice president or Mr. Trump, but are you getting the feeling that perhaps they're even willing to say, even if it takes a long time, bottom line, it's the top of the agenda, it was a campaign promise?
Not only is it a campaign promise, but it also, a lot of congressmen, moderates, independents, conservatives, including the Freedom Caucus, got an earful after this failed push through, and they said, no, we're not letting you off the hook on this one. If they don't have some sort of repeal and replace before the primaries, this will be disastrous, not just for the Freedom Caucus if they're blamed for it. It would be disastrous for every Republican that ran on repealing and replacing it. And I think they realize it. And so that plays to the hand of the White House a little bit. They can say, look, we've got 4 years. You guys don't on Capitol Hill in Congress. In the House, you've got less than 2 years. So you guys figure this out. We're here to support it and sign it. But I think this is not a bad idea from the president to kind of say, hey, you guys are in charge. You're the ones that have to get the votes together. Maybe y'all should slow down and become a little bit more friendly. But again, I think the Twitter wars on this issue kind of have to stop because it's not going to help anybody get what they want at the end of the day. Not going to help the Freedom Caucus or the President of the United States of America.
So, Ellis, we're at what, day 73?
That's right.
And, usually a president has the most political capital in those first 100 days trying to get things done. This GOP plan that was pulled before a vote, such a giant defeat. Is it your feeling that it's going to be very difficult for this president to move forward, to try and get anything done, particularly in this first 100 days?
Well, there's not too much to show for it yet, is there? And the Muslim ban is still tied up in the courts. Tax reform is just a kind of a vague dream. Infrastructure, I don't know where infrastructure is. Maybe they ought to get on to that. Listen, it is absolutely possible for Donald Trump to change and become a different kind of president. Go make a reasonable deals with the other party, deal with the same people in his own party, and come up with something productive. He hasn't shown any...
All right, welcome back. I'm Frederica Whitfield. So right now, a showdown is brewing over President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Judge Neil Gorsuch. We now know a third Senate Democrat will support Gorsuch, Senator Joe Donnelly of Indiana. Tomorrow, the Senate Judiciary Committee is expected to vote on whether to send his nomination to the full Senate. That final confirmation vote is expected to happen on Friday. But there are still big challenges. It's still unclear whether Republicans have the votes to break a Democratic filibuster. Let's bring in now CNN Supreme Court reporter Ariane DeVoe. So, Ariane, where are we now that this third Democrat says he will support Gorsuch?
Well, Fred, you're right. Tomorrow's the big day, right? The Senate Judiciary Committee is going to vote. We expect Gorsuch to advance, but we also will get a sense of where other key Democrats are, and it's all about the math. As things stand, it's going to take 60 votes to confirm him. As of Friday, 36 Dems, led by Chuck Schumer, said they'd filibuster, but 3 Democrats, the last one just happening today, said that they would vote in support. They said, look, they're furious about Merrick Garland not getting a vote, but they also said elections matter. But the Republicans came back and said, look, if you Democrats, if you filibuster, then we'll vote to change the rules, trigger the nuclear option. Fred, that's kind of a showdown.
Yes, it is indeed, and it's not necessarily popular with everyone.
Exactly. It's not. Both sides are saying, are calling it historic, but both McConnell and Pence have said by Friday. So we'll see what happens then.
So there are 52 Republicans. You need 60. They would change the rules, so to speak, on this nuclear option so that they would be able to confirm Gorsuch in under 60 votes.
Yeah, that's right.
And I fell on the ground, and to them it was a good test to see if I would be able to get back up. And I was able to just pop back up.
Why was this so important to you that you were able to do everything equally?
It wouldn't be fair that I was given, you know, something on a golden platter.
We have learned a lot.
Ferreira graduated the academy president of his class, an honor given to him by his fellow recruits. And now, in uniform again, he's an inspiration to the community he serves.
I try to get myself involved in everything I can to help somebody's bad day turn into a good day.
Bryn Gingras, CNN, New York.
All right, the next hour of the CNN Newsroom starts right now. Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me this Sunday. I'm Frederica Whitfield. All right, President Donald Trump's tough week just got tougher. Just days before his first face-to-face meeting with China's president, Trump has laid down an explosive ultimatum. Either China does something about North Korea or the U.S. will. His provocative comments come as revelations about his associates' ties to Russia snowballs. Trump's fired national security advisor are now coming clean about thousands of dollars in speaking fees from 3 Russian companies. But there could be a huge win for the Trump team just around the corner, with the Senate set to begin voting tomorrow on Trump's nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Gorsuch's path to 60 is still not certain, but just a short time ago, a 3rd Democrat confirmed his vote will be a yes. The Senate Majority Leader says there is just no good reason to vote no.
There's no rational basis, no principled reason for voting against Neil Gorsuch, and that's what's before the Senate this week.
And in just a moment, we'll speak live with Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters and get her reaction to all of these new developments. But first, I want to get to Ryan Noble, CNN Washington correspondent. So, Ryan, tell us about these comments from Trump on North Korea, and does this change the tone of his planned meeting with China's president?
It could, Frederica. I mean, we knew that Donald Trump had a lot on his plate when it came to this conversation with President Xi of China, and we knew he was probably going to talk to him about trade, about currency, about a number of things. But this interview with the Financial Times sets the stage for North Korea to be the #1 agenda item. Listen to what Trump told the newspaper. He said, first, China has great influence over North Korea, and China will either decide to help us with North Korea or they won't. He also went on to say, if they do, that will be very good for China. And if they don't, it won't be good for anyone. Trump also telling the Financial Times that he's not afraid for the United States to deal with the North Korean situation with or without the Chinese, which will create certainly an interesting dynamic for this meeting coming up later this week. Also today on ABC, Trump's ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, also talked about the topic of North Korea. Listen to what she had to say.
Oh, no. China has to cooperate. This is now down to, do we want to continue to see these ballistic missile attacks from North Korea, or does China want to do something about it? And this is all about the fact that they need to have action. And we're going to continue to put pressure on China to have action. That will be shown in multiple ways. But what we are going to do is say, China, you know that you're the only one that's doing this. We appreciate that you stopped coal going into North Korea, but we know it's going in other ways. At some point, we need to see definitive actions by China condemning North Korea and not just calling them out for it.
And so we have Trump on one end saying that he's not afraid to go at it alone to deal with North Korea, but then you have the ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, making it clear that they expect China to be a partner in this situation. We'll have to see how this plays into these meetings coming up later this week in South Florida. Fred?
All right, Ryan Noble, thank you so much. All right, joining me right now, Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters. I want to get your reaction to Donald Trump's threats on North Korea by way of the Financial Times. Do you see this as a genuine threat of U.S. intervention in North Korea, or is this bluster?
Well, one of the things we've discovered about this new president is he has no clue about how to deal with foreign matters. This threat in a news conference prior to meeting with the head of state is just not good. He may think that he can threaten people and that we have the biggest guns, etc., but he should be about trying to avoid war. He should be about trying to figure out ways to work with China in such a way that they will want to work with us to deal with North Korea. He's dangerous, and he should not be talking with this kind of bluster, and I'm hopeful that somebody at the White House will pull his coat and tell him to stop it. This is not the way to lead this country.
Do you have any feelings, Congresswoman, about these meetings? President Trump met with Japanese Prime Minister Abe at Mar-a-Lago, and now this meeting with the Chinese president will be taking place at Mar-a-Lago. Do you have any strong opinions as to whether it's appropriate, whether there are any conflicts of interest?
Well, yes, I do have some feelings about it, and I do think he should be meeting at the White House. When you have these leaders coming from all over the world to the United States, it should be formalized, it should be at the White House, it should be in a setting that lends itself to the kind of conversation and relationships that's respectful. He's just trying to show off Mar-a-Lago. He's just trying to show them how rich he is and what he owns. It's not appropriate, and of course most of what this president does is just not appropriate.
President Trump's refrain, particularly after the defeat of the Republicans' health care bill, has been work with Democrats. Do you believe that is possible on health care, on Trump's tax reform, or on infrastructure efforts, especially after this president has signed executive orders to get the ball rolling on repealing Obamacare and undoing President Obama's environmental efforts?
Unfortunately, this president does not know how to work with the members of Congress. He does not know how to work with leaders of other countries. He simply does not understand. First thing he should do is try to get his Republican caucus in order. He's got the Freedom Caucus that's opposed to him. They now are resisting him. They don't like the way he's talking about them and threatening them. They don't care about this threat that he's going to come into their districts and work against them. And so before talking about the Democrats, he really needs to develop the relationships inside his own Republican caucus that would help them to get to some kind of way of dealing with the Democrats. Let me just say this, that we are not going to entertain repeal. We will entertain the idea that we can improve on Obamacare, that there may be some fixes that we can do, but as long as they're talking about repeal, we're not at the table, because we're not going to entertain repealing it at all.
At the same time, you know, are Democrats seizing on a position of payback, so to speak, against this president who tried to delegitimize President Obama with the whole birther movement, denying a hearing for Supreme Court nominee Merrick Garland? And if so, what's the risk in doing that?
Well, the fact of the matter is, without all of that, and I mean, those were outrageous kinds of actions that he took, you know, talking about Obama was not born in this country, et cetera, et cetera. What he has done since he has been president has been outrageous. He has not provided legitimate leadership. And this last action that he was involved with, Nunes, and I mean, I do believe that he was involved, they concocted a scheme by which it would appear that somehow his accusation about being wiretapped was real, and he tried to convert that into talk about possible surveillance where his people were picked up, you know, doing surveillance. And so he has done so many things to show that he doesn't understand government. He's not willing to learn. He doesn't learn from his mistakes. Instead of learning, he gets up the next morning and tweets something else all over again. Most people believe that he's about diversion, that he's about keeping people from really dealing with the issue. We want to know whether or not there was collusion. We want to know about the hacking into the DNC and the interference with our elections. And I really want to know, because I know if we can prove collusion, that he is impeachable. A lot of people don't want to talk about that, but I do. I want to talk about him. I want to talk about this Kremlin clan that's around him, all of them with oil interests. But more than that, they're all focused on lifting the sanctions. This love of Putin that he has, this business that he has of always commending him and talking about what a great leader he is, it's all about this oil, I believe, and wanting to lift the sanctions. That includes Flynn, that includes Manafort, this includes even Tillerson, who comes from Exxon. And so I think that if we do the investigations, if we follow the dollar, and if we understand why this president is talking the way that he's talking and telling us that we should know that Putin is our friend, we're going to find out what it's all about. And I think that those people, Republicans, people in some of the small towns and rural communities that are standing with him now, they're not going to be able to stand with him when they understand the danger he is to our country. And I'm saying, for those of us who understand this and we're concerned about our democracy, we're concerned about our country, we are showing how patriotic we are in being willing to take on this president and the way that he's misleading this country because we want to make sure that the democracy is secure. And so I'm just waiting for real investigations to take place, and we can forget about my side of the House. On the House side, that Intelligence Committee cannot move forward with Nunes. That does not make
sense. You think
sense.
that's been completely compromised? And you mentioned the word impeachment. It was March 16th in a tweet where you said, get ready for impeachment. It sounds as though you still believe that is a road that will eventually lead to this president. And do you also believe that there could potentially be ties to conflicts of interest as it pertains to financial interests, that even his eldest daughter, who is now an employee of the White House, Ivanka Trump, it has been revealed in the financial disclosures that there may be some real conflicts as it pertains to her and her holdings, as well as interests, financial interests of her husband, also an advisor in the White House, Jared Kushner?
Well, of course, I think there are any number of ways that conflict of interest can be proven. I still think that we have to pay attention to the hotel that he built on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. It was funded by Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank is one of the biggest money laundering banks in the world, and they lent him $170 million to help with that hotel. I think there's some problems there. I think there are conflicts with all of his business dealings and whether or not he's really turned him over to his sons. I think there are conflicts of interest that would be revealed somewhat in his tax returns if he would only show them. I think Americans should be outraged by this president by now. An unwillingness to share his tax returns, an unwillingness to completely divest himself from his business interests. All of this just mounts up to a president that is incapable of running this country, has no business doing it, and the fact of the matter is we've got to get him out of here. We really have to get him out of the seat for being the President of the United States of America.
Earlier I spoke with attorney Mark Zaid, who had this to say about a challenge for members of Congress. Listen.
Congress needs to enact laws. And if they want to do it prospectively so it doesn't impact this administration since the Republicans are in control, that's fine. But the laws they enacted in the wake of President Kennedy pertained more to executive branch employees and not to White House employees. There are ethical issues, but not laws that necessarily directly impacted. So I think this is a situation where the majority of the American people don't want this type of conflict of interest to exist. So we need a law.
Is that an assignment you and other members of Congress are willing to take up?
Oh, absolutely. The members of Congress are willing to take up whatever needs to be taken up to get this administration right. They are absolutely, basically overwhelmed by the scandals, and the near scandals that just come up every day. I mean, they keep coming. We don't know what we're going to be confronted with next. We have so much uncertainty in government now because of this president, until we really do have to find a way, first of all, to get the investigations going so that we can root out all of the conflicts of interest, root out collusion, root out all of the...
Steve decided to seize upon a moment of hair. What's your thought as to whether this is a reflection of the vitriol and a level... All right, tough talk from President Trump on North Korea in reference to the growing nuclear threat. He told the Financial Times today, if China is not going to solve North Korea, we will. That is all I'm telling you. That from the president. Let's talk more about what lies ahead now for the week for this president. I'm joined now by CNN political commentator and Republican strategist Alice Stewart and Democratic strategist Matthew Littman. Good to see both of you. All right, so Matthew, you first. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said China must cooperate on North Korea. President Trump says, well, if China is not going to solve North Korea, we will. That is all I'm going to tell you. Are these contradictory statements?
Well, I'm going to say a couple of things about Nikki Haley. First of all, even as a Democrat, I appreciate what she's doing on Israel at the UN. Number two, North Korea. This is really the biggest problem that this country is facing right now, is what's going on in North Korea. Donald Trump has a problem with China because he backtracked when he spoke about Taiwan as soon as he came in as president. So he's got a bit of a problem here in terms of credibility with the Chinese. We do need China's help. We don't want to go it alone, I think, with North Korea. This is a big problem because North Korea is going to have weapons.
So do you think he's bluffing, that he doesn't really mean it?
Yeah, I think he does. I think in Trump's mind, he thinks he may be able to go it alone. But going it alone on North Korea is nothing that you want to do. You want to have a coalition together. The Chinese have a lot of influence over North Korea. This is a case where we need the Chinese. That's why you haven't seen Trump, for example, declare China a currency manipulator, which he said he was going to do as soon as he got in. Because we actually need China, and we need to have a better relationship with China.
So, Alice, is that a strange thing to say, though, on the eve of hosting the Chinese leader, if, you know, the U.S. could use the assistance of China, but then say publicly through the Financial Times that we don't need anyone? What kind of table is that setting for this upcoming meeting?
Frederica, this sends a powerful message that, look, there are two ways to go about this. We can do it with China or we can do it alone. And I think Nikki Haley laid it down the groundwork very precisely this morning, saying that, look, no one's in a better position to influence North Korea to do away with their ballistic missile program than China. And
but weren't they saying different things? I mean, that's kind of the point. I mean, Nikki Haley's saying one thing, you know, China, you know, you have some leverage here, but then the president is saying, we can do this.
The point is that ideally we could work with China. We can get China to put the influence on North Korea. But if that's not going to happen, if they're going to sit on their hands, then president is not afraid to take matters into his own hands and do what needs to be done. This is an important message and dialogue to get out there on the table and to, especially in advance of the meetings this week, and let them know that we mean business. North Korea is not a problem that anyone should be taking lightly, and whether we work with China or we do it alone, it's something that clearly is a top priority for the president.
And Matthew, speaking of going it alone, when it comes to health care in this nation, the president, has been at war with the Freedom Caucus, even saying that he must fight them and the Dems in 2018. Congressman Jim Jordan has been on the receiving end of this criticism from the president, and here's what he had to say this morning.
Tweets and statements and blame don't change facts, and the facts remain the same. When you look at the document, you look at the legislation, it doesn't repeal Obamacare. Even people who support it say have called it Obamacare light, and it doesn't unite the country. When have you seen a bill come forward where only 17% of the country supports it? So let's do better than that. Let's start over. Let's get this thing done right.
So, Matthew, how can the president get anything done by alienating an entire group of people within his own party?
He can't. I mean, he's talking about doing health care again now, infrastructure and tax reform all this year. I mean, if you believe that he's going to be able to do all three of those things, then as part of that infrastructure package, I have a bridge I'd like to sell you. It's impossible. They've said that by the end of July, they'll have a complete tax reform done and through Congress. That's not going to happen. So on health care, listen, Trump was unable to sell his health care package to the American people. We talked before, 17% approval of that health care package. A lot of people said he didn't even know what was in it. Last week he spoke to the Senate, and he said to the senators that this is going to be easy, and they laughed at him. And I think that's a big problem for Trump going forward, is that some of the stuff he wants to do, he's being mocked.
And then later he said nobody knew that this was so hard. So, Alice, the White House, is remaining positive. Trump even tweeting, that anybody, especially fake news media, who thinks that repeal and replace of Obamacare is dead, does not know the love and strength in the Republican Party. And then this was the vice president just yesterday.
But the president and I have faith. We have faith that Congress is going to step up and do the right thing. When Congress finally decides to repeal and replace Obamacare, President Trump and I will be ready to work with them hand in glove. You can take it to the bank.
So, Alice, what about that messaging?
Well, that's true. Look, Vice President Pence has made it clear from the very beginning the Republicans were elected to Washington on the promise to their constituents they would repeal and replace Obamacare, among many other things, and they're going to be promise keepers. It's no surprise, it's not a big shock that the first attempt didn't go so well, because they did not work together. I think everyone's learned from that mistake, and they're going to work together. The tweets about the Freedom Caucus, that's not going to intimidate them. That's not going to get them to abandon their principles. They've been back in their districts the last few days getting overwhelming support from their constituents because they did stand firm. They did say they were going to go at it again and try and put together and put forth a health care plan that will do what they set out to do, which is to lower premiums and increase access to health care. And at the second bite of the apple, I think that's exactly what needs to be on the table, and I have every confidence that Republicans will get together and make it work.
All right, Alice, Matthew, stick around. There's more to come. We've got more time. Showdown taking shape on Capitol Hill over the confirmation of Supreme Court pick Neil Gorsuch. Up next, we'll zero in on his path forward.
Choose to go, to indulge your curiosity, explore a new road, to see where it takes you. Meet the leaders who change the game.